Good evening and welcome back. So in the wonderful world of double standards, we have a man jailed for urinating at PC Keith Palmer's memorial during the protest, and of course I commented on this before, my point at the time being that most likely he doesn't know what he's doing, and as it turns out he didn't know what he was doing. It's hardly a surprise there. If he came out to protect the monuments, then why on earth would he be urinating on one? If the idea is to protect British heroes and people who have made Britain what it is today, then why would you be desecrating a memorial of one? And that is exactly his point, that he didn't know what he was doing. But, nonetheless, he has been jailed, 14 days, that is the sentence. So as they say here, Andrew Banks, 28, of Stansted, Essex, was photographed during Saturday's right-wing protest in London. That's how the BBC fucking reports it. That they're just going to throw the bias straight out, right away. Yes. Would you like to mention what the so-called right-wing were protesting? Was it that actually they were trying to say that you've got no point here in your protests, the cultural, Marxist, feminist, communist BLM movement, and instead we wish to protect the statues which are there in memorial of the people who made this country the Great Britain that it is? It definitely could be. So to try and call them protests, I suppose, what are they protesting then? The lack of police response and governmental response to protect the things that are important for this country? Is that what they're protesting? So by protest, you mean they're upholding the rule of law. That is their protest. So radical. So what are we protesting today, guys? Well, we're upholding the rule of law. So, oh, what a radical protest. Woo, such a badass. So, yeah, but that's what they are. And to dare to call them right-wing protests is infuriating, at the very least. But, okay, back to the news. Let's ignore BBC's fucking bias, the blatantly biased corporation. And that's why I use this site, as I've mentioned before, because they are so blatantly corrupt and biased, and yet I have to pay for them. Then let us see how they wish to report people like me, and most likely people like you as well. So he was sentenced to 14 days in custody, which is a nice way of saying imprisoned for 14 days, after pleading guilty to outraging public decency at Westminster Magistrates Court. Just to put in focus, that is what he was convicted of. Outraging public decency. The public decency part is predominantly for urinating in public, not being particular to desecrating a memorial. That is not actually uncommon, that if you plead guilty, the idea is that you plead down to a lesser charge, therefore the punishment isn't as much, because then you're avoiding the lengthy judiciary process of going through all the evidence and then finding you eventually guilty of the thing that they were trying to convict you of originally. So you lose the benefit of going scot-free, but you gain from not having such a big sentence. That is why. So it seems like he pled down instead. So they mentioned that PC Keith Palmer, 48, was stabbed while on duty during the Westminster attack on 22nd of March 2017. He was one of 5 people murdered by Khalid Massoud. They're not going to mention why he was stabbed or why he was one of the 5 people murdered, and they say murdered because it was during a terrorist attack from Islamic ideology, from a foreign ideology wishing to pick apart what it means to be British, meaning to attack the fabric of Britain. That was the idea of the attack, and by murdering 5 people, he of course went some way to succeeding in his attempt. But they're not going to mention it was Islamist ideology, and it was the essential reading of the Quran, and he was a fundamentalist of doing exactly what Muhammad said, not from a reformed Muslim, but instead actually reading the Quran and doing exactly what is there, spelt out literally. They're not going to mention that, but of course they're going to mention a right-wing protest, because they're liars. As simple as that. So as they say, the image of Banks was widely shared on social media on Saturday as violent clashes between far-right protesters and police took place in central London, which is bullshit. Really, utterly bullshit. The one so-called protest is whereby they were trying to protect the monuments and were moved away from them. That is it. They saw the police were not doing their job and they wanted to actually do the job that the police were supposed to do. And if the police weren't doing their job and allowing the monuments to be vandalised, then they wished to be able to do the job that the police should be doing. And the attacks, the so-called attacks, the clashes then, if you will, took place because the police weren't doing their job. That is why. Should it have happened? No, of course not. Should the police have been in that situation whereby they weren't doing their job? No, of course not. Clues in the name, that's part of the job description. Should they have just allowed the BLM protesters to walk wherever they want, be allowed there by the police walking along with them? No, of course not. Should the police have done what they did in order to result in such a situation? No, of course not. Should the counter-protesters wishing to defend Britain have resorted to such acts? No, of course not. Was there anything else they could do? No, of course not. It is a very difficult situation. I'm not suggesting getting violent, but if the police aren't doing their job, then, the rule of law is there for a reason. So Banks, a Tottenham Hotspur fan, that is basically to say a football hooligan, said he had travelled to central London with other football supporters to protect statues, but admitted he did not know which statue, so he was caught up in it, yes. He was said to have drunk 16 pints during Friday night into Saturday morning and had not been to sleep. Okay. Banks contacted police after being confronted by his father, the court heard. Yes, believe it or not, this is someone who made a mistake, they realised they made a mistake, their father reprimanded them. Yes, they had a role model of their own father who said, I think I recognise you, you were in this, you did something bad, you better turn yourself in, mate, because that is what good fathers do. And of course, being a son who listened to his father, he did exactly that, and then faced the front of the law because of what he did, which is exactly what is to be expected. He did the very British thing of going, okay, I've made a mistake. My father, who was there and present, has informed me that what I did was wrong, and therefore I'm going to turn myself in so that the course of justice can be allowed to continue. That is what he did. He had his father there, and he did what is expected, to go peacefully to the police, turn himself in, say exactly what happened, and let the rule of law happen as it should do. That is what he did. What he did originally, obviously, not a good thing to do. Nobody condones it. Of course, it's abhorrent. Did he mean to do it? No, he didn't, as he mentions there. In fact, the Chief Magistrate, Emma Arbuthnot, said, I accept you were drunk and you did not know where you were urinating. Your explanation is you had 16 pints to drink, you hadn't been to bed, and a group of football supporters were coming up to protect the monuments. The irony is, rather than protecting the monuments, you almost urinated on one. That was more by luck than judgment. And yes, almost, basically, he just found a corner and wished to go there, so he was out of the way of people, and unfortunately was right next to the memorial. Not something he meant to do. And this is where it comes down to the intent doesn't matter, but the result does. However, he was only given 14 days, which suggests that there was leniency here. So as they say, his counsel showed Harris that his client was ashamed by his action and had mental health issues, which is just a throwaway. I mean, you can include that with anybody anyway, and anything can be a mental health issue. That's basically a non-starter. But the point by saying he was ashamed by his action shows that ordinarily he is a law-abiding citizen. He actually thinks about what he is trying to do, and in this instance, of course, he didn't do the right thing. He was intoxicated, so he didn't know what he was doing. Should he have let himself get intoxicated? No, of course not. Does any self-respecting person have 16 pints through Friday night and Saturday morning? No, of course not. Should that be held against him? Yes, it should. That if you do something because you're drunk, okay, you were inebriated, therefore you don't know what you were doing. Did you know you were getting drunk? Yes, you did, in which case you were held responsible for that, and therefore held responsible for your actions afterwards. Unless it comes to women sleeping with men, in which case that's definitely rape. But, hey, this is just unequal treatment of the law again. So, Met Police Commander Baz Javid said, Keith Palmer was a brave police officer and the memorial stands testament to his courage. Banks' action in stark contrast were unpleasant and extremely upsetting to PC Palmer's family and colleagues. While I know that Banks did not act with intent, I welcome the sentence handed down by the court for his thoughtless and distasteful behaviour. Yep, so, bearing that in mind, he did something wrong, he owned up to it, 14 days in custody, simple as that. This happened extremely quickly, resolved very swiftly. And with this in mind, let's remember, we live in a racist country. So, of course, we've got the 135 arrests made across 200 UK Black Lives Matter protests over the weekend, including, of course, the statue of Edward Colston being thrown in the river, of which Avon and Somerset Police had launched an investigation and were seeking to identify those involved with the memorial of the statue. The removal of the statue. Bear in mind, there are, of course, videos showing these people, and it would be quite easy to identify them, but they have not done so. And Bristol Police basically says the same thing, that the police launched criminal damage investigation over toppling of Edward Colston's statue. The mayor is saying that, yes, I understand it was a criminal act, but hey, I also understand why they did it. So, yes, of course, the law should be upheld, but does it actually have to be? I mean, you know, it wasn't a good statue, so how about we actually let it go, you know, just this once? And that is his take of it. So they say that chiefs at Avon and Somerset Police say an investigation into criminal damage has been launched. Are they actually going to find anyone? Most likely not, because they never really do. Nor if it's politically expedient to just let these people go, and that's how it seems to happen. So, as I say, with the mayor, asked whether he wanted to see those involved with removing the statue charged, Mr. Rees added, that is up to the criminal justice system. You could just say yes. I don't really intervene in criminal matters like that. I'm only an elected mayor. And that's not for me to go and be a cheerleader to the police in any criminal investigations. It's not for me to say the law's the law. Downing Street said people can campaign for statues to be removed. Yes, of course. It's a democratic process, and that they should be denied at every time. But what happened yesterday was a criminal act, and when the criminal law is broken, that is unacceptable, and the police will want to hold to account those responsible. Yes, the police will. Despite acknowledging that discrimination or racism does exist in Britain, the Prime Minister does not agree that this is a racist country. Well, no, of course not. So, what the mayor is saying is, I understand why these people did it, and the police have a job, but it's not for me to decide about the law. I'm not an elected official, except I am, but let's forget that. It's because, you know, I'm an ethnic minority, don't you know, and we're discriminated against because we can never be elected into any positions of power, except for me and the Mayor of London and several others. But let's ignore those because they run counter to the narrative, and therefore we can't accept those examples. Guess I'm because he's a traitor to the narrative there. Mr. Rees warned that it would take more than the removal of a controversial statue to tackle racism that was stitched into the system, giving no examples whatsoever. And was like, oh, but George Floyd's death, that's clearly an example. I'm pretty sure that he's going to go down as one of the coronavirus deaths. And if he bloody well does, not only will this be an example, well, it's up to you. Either it's an example of saying, well, then COVID-19 deaths aren't really COVID-19 deaths, or then he wasn't killed because he died of COVID-19. So which is it going to bloody be? You tell me. I'm always intrigued to hear what the fucking apologetics have to say on this. But just to inform you, as the law stands, as I love to bring in the law into my videos, so you know where we stand. So, as they say here, amendments to the Criminal Damage Act 1971, and this was updated in 2008. A person who, without lawful excuse, destroys, damages, or desecrates a war memorial shall be guilty of an offence, and a person guilty of an offence under the aforementioned Section 1A is liable, on summary conviction, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or to a fine not exceeding level 3 on the standard scale, or to both, or on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years, or to a fine, or both. So, the desecrating the war memorial, that's the closest we've got to someone who took out a terrorist. They say not exceeding 6 months. And of course, Andrew Banks got 14 days, which is greatly reduced from the possible 6 months. But of course, he wasn't charged under this law. Instead, it was outraging public decency. I believe that's how they framed it. There are too many laws to try and keep track of them all. Yes, outraging public decency. But in terms of the other things that we've seen, so let's say burning the Union flag, Is that illegal in and of itself? No. If you own a Union flag and you wish to burn it, you're probably a little bit retarded, as in mentally slow, but you are legally allowed to do that. You own property, you can destroy it if you want, it's your property, nobody cares. However, if this is somebody else's property, then the standard rules and laws of vandalism occur. And that is exactly what happened here at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. And of course we have a video of the person who did it, various stills and photos, easily identifiable individual who was responsible. You could easily arrest him, convict him, imprison him for the vandalism that was caused. But of course that hasn't happened because he's black. So yes, imprison the white person, but not the black person, because apparently we live in a racist country. How backwards do you have to be? At what bloody point are they going to admit, it seems like black people are actually given a more lenient service than white people? At what point is that going to be admitted? That the law is not equal? The police, the justice system, the law, whoever it might be, the individual police officers are hesitant to arrest black people because they're going to be called racist. The solicitors or the lawyers are hesitant to try and prosecute black people for fear of being racist, and then the judges are fearful of handing down a sentence which is in accordance with the law to black people, of fear of being called racist. So no, we're not a bloody racist country persecuting the blacks and the ethnic minorities, even though they're not bloody minorities in London, but instead it is quite the opposite. If you're white, if you're a man, if you're straight, worst of all, if you're a straight white man, then of course you're going to be carted off because nobody gives a shit. But if you're one of these other so-called minorities, even though they're bloody not, then of course you're going to get preferential treatment. So radicalism is not pushing at an open door, which is what these so-called radicals are. They are communists just asking for more power, and they will never be satisfied. No matter what they get, they will always be asking for more. We've seen the civil rights movement in the 1960s to say everybody should be treated equally under the law, and yeah, that's been passed. For men, women, any religion, race, colour, creed, whatever it might be. Equal treatment under the law. That's been done and dealt with. Is that enough? No, because of apparently systemic racism, which what that actually means, if you want to get to the root cause of it, put simply, is welfare state. There aren't enough black fathers in black communities, and therefore there aren't enough male role models for the children of black families, and far too many children are born out of wedlock and raised in broken homes, and therefore the children do not have a strong male role model, which is necessary for their life. And I know that the left are trying to destroy this by saying that men are women and women are men and you can be whatever you say you are, which is blatantly false. And I know J.K. Rowling's come under fire for this recently as well. But that is the crux of the issue. Get rid of the welfare state. Understand that if you want to be able to raise a family, you actually have to have a family unit. The nuclear family is there for a reason, and it is vital for the children's growth. Trying to replace a parent with a bit of money is not nearly good enough. It is grossly inadequate and will never do the job. Do not even for a second think that you can replace a parent with the government who has no understanding of the individual's lifestyle, but is instead just trying to throw money at the problem. Money cannot replace human connection. Never has, and it never will. So that is what you need to do. If you wish to take the law approach and the boots on skulls policies, then by all means, keep prosecuting and arresting these people, but for God's sake, do it equally under the law and don't have this preferential treatment. Because if you don't want these riots and protests to continue, and seeing the so-called far right, which are just nationalists, and no, a nationalist is not a bloody far right. Okay, just briefly, let's say nationalist is far right. Anybody who wants to defend their country is far right. Anybody who wants to build a border wall is far right. In which case, Exhibit A, Berlin Wall, built by the communists. Exhibit B, satellite states, built by the communists. It's a non-starter, it's bullshit. I can go into more detail, but there's really no need. So that is utter bullshit. So if you wish to stop these protests and these counter-protests, I mean, obviously the BBC doesn't, because they love stoking the race wars, because it gets good money, and therefore they can stay out of trouble by reporting on somebody else. So of course they don't. But for anybody who actually wishes to be moral, then if you want to get to the crux of the issue, deal with broken homes and get rid of the welfare state. But for everybody else, stay safe, and as always, until next time, have a good one.